Welcome back to Health Law Pulse, the podcast where we explore the intersection of healthcare, law, and leadership. I'm your host, John Rhodes, healthcare attorney and founder of Health Law Counsel, LLC. I'm really glad you joined us today. Healthcare leaders operate in an environment of constant pressure, something we've explored a number of times. They navigate staffing shortages, financial challenges, regulatory scrutiny, cybersecurity threats, operational disruptions, and the daily realities of caring for patients in increasingly complex systems. Most leadership conversations focus on how organizations respond during a crisis, but my guest today argues that the greatest leadership challenge often begins after the crisis appears to be over. My guest today is Savio Clemente, a keynote speaker, healthcare leadership strategist, TEDx speaker, journalist, best-selling author, and creator of the Adaptive Resilience Leadership Framework. Through more than 2,000 interviews with healthcare leaders and his own experience rebuilding after surviving cancer twice, Savio has developed a unique perspective on decision-making, resilience, and human performance under pressure. In this episode, we discuss why leadership performance often declines after periods of disruption, how cognitive overload impacts decision quality, the role of psychological safety in organizational performance, and what healthcare leaders can do to maintain clarity when the pressure never fully goes away. This is Health Law Pulse. Well, Savio, thank you very much for carving out some time and joining us. Get my camera situated here. Joining us on Health Law Pulse. Appreciate you joining us.
John, thank you for having me. I'm excited to see what we unearth today.
Well, same here, same here. I'm actually really excited to have you on. We had a talk a little bit a few days ago or last week regarding some of your what you're doing right now in the leadership space, particularly in the healthcare context. Before we start, can you just tell our audience what your background is, what you do, and kind of give us a little context there. We can get going.
Sure. So, title wise or credential wise, I'm a keynote and TEDx speaker. I'm a journalist. At this point, I've probably interviewed over 2,000 leaders, change makers, and also celebrities. I am a board certified health and wellness coach, best-selling author, and unfortunately, a two-time cancer survivor. I was diagnosed initially in 2014, and then my cancer resurfaced in 2024. And fortunately, I did get a complete response to treatment.
Well, that's great news. Absolutely, and certainly a lot of learnings that we'll tap into today. Savio, thank you for that. I'm very intrigued by you've interviewed. You're a journalist. You've interviewed over 2,000 healthcare leaders. So I'm really intrigued by your perspective on some of these issues that we're going to be talking about. Most healthcare organizations I'm sure as you well know, spend a lot of effort, a lot of time preparing and responding to different crises. You've argued in the past that the bigger risk often comes after that crisis ends. What is that? Give us a little bit of taste of what that means. You argue, what is the post-crisis leadership gap? Let's start off. What does that mean?
Sure. It's really the period after disruption or sustained pressure that performance on the surface seems like it's actually functioning properly, but really
Mhm.
there's cognitive load, stress, degrading alignment, and it quietly then ends up forming a larger gap, and then it sort of drifts, and then it creates even more problems that it's really hard to then circumnavigate, to come back to form. So really it posits, the and my lived experience tells me this,
Mm.
because from what I've experienced is that people always wanna survive the crisis, and that's wonderful, but
Yeah.
the real challenge comes after the crisis. How do you reorientate? How do you reinvigorate? How do you find a new way forward besides a new way normal? And so for me, that is the sweet spot of what I speak with. So that comes with talks about sustained pressure, cognitive overload. How do you self regulate? How do you see yourself beyond a title or identity or a role? Because let me tell you, being in the hospital for 29 days in a quarantine room,
Mhm.
all you really have is, is silence and stillness and your thoughts about not only living or dying, but who am I in this situation and what kind of impact or non impact have I made in this world?
Yeah. Uh, Very interesting, and you make this distinction pretty clear that there's a difference between surviving, as you just mentioned, or recovery and performance. What, do you mind just give us a little bit more detail about that? What warning signs, so if we got healthcare leaders that are listening to this now, what warning signs indicate that perhaps an organization hasn't recovered fully from a crisis?
So the central thesis is really performance doesn't fail first, clarity does.
Mm,
So the telltale signs are the hidden signals and the patterns, whether that's uh, ignoring certain things that are happening, acquiescing or not allowing your team to actually fully function the way they're supposed to. Oftentimes, it's obviously the cognitive load that happens and the pressure that happens. Most of the time, there's a reason why. At least doctors are often said that they don't make great patients because they can dole out expertise and advice and everything that they've learned, but to actually live that and to experience that in the uncertainty and the unknowing is really difficult. So it's really about resourcing self
mm,
to a large degree. That could be done in numerous ways. For me, it's meditation in the morning, but it
yeah.
could be through prayer, breathing, having some form of journaling, exercise, taking a walk in silence, whatever the case may be, it's really about figuring out for yourself what's actually happening. And so we can touch a little bit about my TEDx talk, which I talk about 7 minutes to wellness, how to love your inner stranger, and my little mini framework called the Aloha Reboot, which is really 7 minutes on how you can actually come back to self. Because as we all know, aloha in Hawaiian means hello. And so it's a hello to your inner self.
Yeah. Well, let's dive into that because here's the context that I'm thinking of, Savio, is in the last episode I had a practicing hospitalist on, and we talked a lot about the intense pressures that he has on a daily basis, in trying to balance the pressures of a hospital medicine with um everything else. The kind of balancing the clinical decisions with the time pressure, with being interrupted all the time, dealing with really both chronic and acute critical conditions. So, what advice do you have? And let's bring it into the context of the advice that you give in your TED talk. What advice do you have to someone like that, or and of course, it's not limited to that, right? And I'm sure we have everyone listening is under some sort of pressure, that's just not sustainable. So what is your advice and guidance on that?
Well, when it comes to pressure, there's a movie currently out right now called Pressure. If you've
Yeah,
seen the trailers with Eisenhower and D-Day and World War II making those decisions. So it impacts us all socially, politically, and even now technologically with AI. The pressure just mounts and mounts. So the first key is really to just establish or really organize or reorganize yourself on what is the thing that I'm trying to achieve. So in coaching, we talk a lot about goals versus vision. A goal is just certain set points that you want to reach, but a vision is how you want to be, how you want to feel, what you want to reclaim. And so think the first thing is to actually name what the pressure is. What is the pressure, and how is it really affecting? So whether that's a word vomit or typing it out or writing it out, whatever the case may be, actually name it. I'm a huge proponent in naming it, not so that you can identify with it, so that you can actually create a psychological distance from the problems, creating a buffer from that. I'll go back to my own, health journey. In the hospital, there was a few things that I did that was really tantamount to really accepting pressure and allowing it to inform me. So instead of looking at chemo, because everyone thinks of chemo as poison and all that, I reframed it, John. I saw it as an elixir. I saw it as in the Bible, they call it manna, life force from the universe, because that drug was scientifically and medically designed to do a certain task. And so if I don't submit or I don't surrender to it, it's going to not do any good. For me, when the doctors would come and do their rounds, 13, 14 people deep, yeah, I looked terrible. I felt terrible. I was tired. But I always made it a point to actually meet them where they were because they weren't just healing me, I was healing myself through them. It was a it was a give and take type of situation. So not only did I have to voice what was actually happening to me, I actually had to accept the energy that they were giving, and I had to give that back in a large portion of ways. And there's a lot of talk about this idea of back in the day where intellect was the number one trait to have. Then we were told, no, emotional intelligence is. And
Uh-huh.
now really is this idea of metacognition. So in that hospital bed for 29 days, who's the person who was in that particular pressure, who's in that person who's actually suffering or in that discomfort, and who's the one who's outside of it thinking that their mental acuity is working, that the physiology to some degree is alive, that their spirit is wanting to grasp at other things beyond the reality that I'm facing. I would say also the most important thing as well is to resource how you accomplish getting out of that pressure or out
Mm.
of that situation in the past. How did that inform or how can that inform what you are doing currently? And lastly, I think it's also important to actually voice to a partner or a colleague or someone within the organization that you are going through that, a trusted person, because that allows you to find a way to deal with it, not just separately, but with another being.
Yeah, that's really great advice, and consistent with what I've heard from others, Savio, especially clinicians. I interviewed a trauma surgeon who what he wrote a book on how to deal with kind of all the emotional issues that come after some traumatic, like maybe something went wrong, right, in patient care. How do you deal with that as a clinician? One of the things he mentioned is exactly what you said at the very end is talking to people who are similarly situated, who kind of go through the same things on a daily basis. And my wife is a nurse, and it's very much the same way. She can tell me everything that happened through her day, and like I'm in healthcare. I'm not in healthcare delivery,
Yeah.
so I can understand some of it, but it's totally different when she's talking to other nurses who go with this, go through that on a daily basis, and it really is a um a great way for her to not vent, but, sort of release some of that pressure and to talk through some of that and kind of process some of that. So I think it's really great, advice.
I'm a big fan, and I don't know if you watch it, of The Pit on HBO Max. I don't know if you watch it. No, it's terrible for my nervous system, completely terrible for my nervous system. But I love the realism, and I love the fact that it shows that these doctors who are caring for other people are just not they're not good. They're just not.
Mhm.
And so I think it's important to, like you said, air out that, and also to allow yourself the ability to release some of that, because
Yeah,
I firmly believe, especially in the, keynotes that I've done and the coaching that I've done, that we're all here for a catch and release type of a situation.
right.
What can we hold and what can we let go of?
Yeah, no, that's really good. And it applies to the next topic I wanna talk to you about a little bit, but I wanna shift gears very slightly to decision quality. And, you focus on executive decision quality. We have executives that are listening to this right now. How does in your view, you've interviewed all these healthcare leaders, how does decision quality deteriorate over time?
Well, I think to a large degree, most of the time, it's really about what does said team or said organization or said policies
Mm,
dictate versus what you find to be the right way forward. And most of the time, there's that gap, and there's also that consternation that happens. Most of the time, when it comes to decision quality, it's not always about you trying to be the one who's right in a situation. It's allowing others' input and your output that causes the disconnect there. So
mm,
most of the time, I would say it's really about having more of an objective view about the situation rather than a subjective one.
uh-huh,
Because most of the time, doctors like to be right, clinicians like to be right. Because if they make a mistake, it's costly on both sides. And so, when it comes to decision quality, really the end result is always about trying to figure out from a team collective
mhm.
who's actually aligned with the principles or the objectives that you wanna reach.
Okay. So let's put that into kind of a practical real world example, which is, and maybe it could be clinical care. I'm sure the same principles apply in the administration world, where you have an executive that has been in a position for a very long time. Uh, some crisis occurs, or there's a very big decision to make. What how do leadership teams recognize it before, this concept of, I don't know, drifting judgment, or maybe the leader is in more of a, uh, is starting to view things more subjectively versus objectively, and what's in the best interests of the organization. What are the early signs of that, and how do you recognize it before it becomes a major issue?
Sure. So in my executive coaching, we not only do talk therapy, but
Mm,
we actually use an embodiment practice. So it's embodiment or somatics, as they call it, which is resourcing exactly how does that actually feel in the body when you're making said decision, because it's not always in the top of the head. I know we all like to live there, but a visual is thinking of it as an elevator that's going actually down within the other parts. So it's really allowing yourself to resource what that feels like, what is maybe images or sounds or things that are popping up for you or bubbling for you that can make that decision quality more, um, having the onus not on a said particular problem, but having it more geared towards what you feel is right. So, classic example: I want to do a, let's say, I want to enact this particular initiative. So ask yourself, is AI, so let's use AI as an example, is AI actually going to create more problems for us, or is it going to alleviate some of the problems? Because there's a learning curve in your team understanding how to use AI properly within that. And then there's also regulations that come into play. So it's really figuring out what is the decision that you want to move forward with, and how can you actually make that more operational with the rest of your team. Because most of the time when it comes to leadership, people often assume that a leader just says it and there it is. But a great leader is someone who people want to emulate, follow, and choose to mirror to a large degree. And so if you are not regulated in that sense, then there's no way forward properly.
yeah, that makes perfect sense, and I suspect that, and I'll use myself as an example. The concept of being self-aware on of cognitive overload, I'm the worst at it. Where, like, I'll be working 12, 14, 15-hour days uh, consecutively, and then it's just I don't really recognize what I'm doing to myself, and at some point I hit a wall, right? I mean, it is I am maxed out. I have hit cognitive overload. And one thing, Savio, that I've learned in 20 years of practicing healthcare law is a lot of compliance failures, a lot of operational failures in the healthcare space, patient safety issues. They rarely begin with bad intentions. Like, no one's
Mhm.
out trying to do nefarious things or hurt patients. They begin with these small judgment errors that compound over time. So, and sometimes it's the cognitive overload that leads up to that. Um, there's a constant state, I think, in healthcare leaders. I think generally, and you tell me because you very interviewed many of them. They operate in this constant state of information overload. So, what does cognitive overload actually do to decision making?
It suffocates it,
Yeah.
correct? Like, I have to ask you this question since you mentioned it as you as an example. When you're in those 12-hour, 14 hours and there's are you in flow? Are you actually in flow and actually creating and feeling like nothing is coming to your attention except for the work?
So it's a great question. At times I do. So there'll be periods within that 12 to 14 hours where I feel like it is to me, and largely because I'm just a big, huge nerd. There's a rush for me in taking things off of my to-do list. So if I have X number of things to do within a 12-hour period, I need all these deadlines to meet. And I'm just knocking it out, knocking it out, knocking it out. It's great. And as I'm knocking it out, more stuff is coming in. It's the I can't get ahead of anything. That's when I start to think, "Oh man, how am I going to do this? There's just no way." And things start to break down, and you get mentally tired, physically tired, and that's when I kind of start to hit this wall.
And then how do you regulate from that? Or is it like you're burned out for that day and
You know?
that's it?
Depends on how severe it is. I mean, so I'll have to take the dog on a walk, right? Or I'll have to, it'll be 7 o'clock, and I just say, "I gotta go to bed." I'll resume this at 3 o'clock tomorrow morning, but I need to get a full night's sleep, so I need to go to bed now, but there are a number of things, but there I'm not great at being self-aware of what's leading up to it, but at some point, I recognize, yeah, I can't do anymore. I just can't. I don't have it.
Yeah. So then this would be a great way for a segue,
Yeah.
my TEDx talk. So I mentioned it earlier. I did a TEDx talk before my relapse. It's called 7 Minutes to Wellness: How to Love Your Inner Stranger. People ask me like, "What do you mean inner stranger?" And I start off my TEDx talk and I say, "If you look at yourself in the mirror, do you recognize that person who's standing there?"
Mhm.
And they're like, someone's like, "Well, so, okay, so what's your inner stranger?" I'm like, "Well, to be truthful, my inner stranger is that young person who never felt completely like rooted when I was growing up. I always felt like, I don't know, I always felt like not completely grounded." And they're like, "Oh, I get it. My inner stranger then is that female, that professional, idealized female that I want to be at work, or that great mother, or that great sibling that I can't be." And so the framework was really easy. It's called the Aloha Reboot. Aloha, as you know, and everyone knows, it means hello in Hawaiian. So it's a hello to your inner self. So it's A stands for acknowledge. So I acknowledge that I was in the hospital with cancer again, dealing with all I need to. So just be really truthful about that. L stands for listening. So in Hawaiian, there is a healing modality called Huna healing. And in Huna healing, they believe that you can actually talk to yourself, that the body organs not only sense the sensations, but has language, has some level of consciousness or intelligence. Sounds weird, but this is what they believe. And so they believe you can actually talk to it. So I often tell people, have a conversation in privacy of your own home, with that, with those parts of yourself. I call it the three brains: the head, heart, and gut, because they do have some type of language, even though they might not physically talk. O stands for opening. So open yourself up to this information, no matter what your belief system is. H stands for harnessing. So harness this, see what works, what doesn't. Not
Mm.
everything's going to work. And A stands for acting. So act with intention, and act with courage, because the data points to the fact that it's not that people don't want to change in life, they just don't know how to change, because they don't know if they're thinking about change, in change, thinking about relapsing from change. So those are the stages of change. So it takes courage in order to do that. And for people, especially healthcare leaders that I work with, who say they don't have time for 7 minutes, which sounds absurd, they just don't. Take one of those and practice it for one day,
Mhm.
and it's just a few minutes, and so it's called the Aloha Reboot, as a very simple framework
Hmm.
to just come back to self. I think a large portion of what we all are dealing with in the world is not a content issue. We can gain and garner content within seconds. It's a
Right.
connection issue, and the connection issue first starts with ourselves.
Yeah. I like that. Um, so is that the way then, if you start with that connection with yourself and there's the kind of self, uh, wellness, I'm not great at this, so you're gonna have to fill in the blanks here as I'm stumbling, but is that the way to distinguish urgency? Because I struggle with this, and I know I'm sure many healthcare leaders do, and clinicians. How do you distinguish? Maybe it's more black and white in the clinical world, right? Because they're basing their criteria based on are clinical, and one clinical situation or condition may be more urgent or important than another, but the rest of us, how do leaders distinguish urgency from importance?
Mm. Well, urgency is really something that has, quote unquote, high stakes, and importance is something that you can, to some degree, put on pause for a little bit. Urgency is something that needs to be reacted to, especially in, and you know this in healthcare, because it's 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 costly for themselves and another human being. Um, I would also say that there is also a difference between how you manage both of those. Urgency is what the word states, which is an urgent matter that
Mm.
needs, and importance is high on that level, but not as acute, or not as important as the rest of urgency. So I think it also depends upon if you're talking about the actual clinical setting, and in a decision behind closed doors, that also changes the dynamics of urgency and importance to a degree.
Mhm. Yeah, and then if I mean, the problem is, right, that some people would define everything as urgent, right? So if everything's urgent, then nothing is. It's like when your mom tells you that you're special, well, okay, everyone's special, right? If everyone's special, then nobody is. It's kind of the same thing, right? Because if everything's urgent, then how do you even prioritize anything? It gets to be tough, and then the pressure builds, and it gets to be more difficult. Savio, how would you define psychological safety?
Mm. The ability to allow Um, I like to say the ability to allow life experiences to dictate how you want to move forward. So I gave you that example in the beginning about psychological distancing. So
Mhm.
like psychological safety is this ability to resource your lived experience and figure out ways in order to create boundaries, in order to create more goodwill, affection, um, quote unquote safety in your life, because
Yeah.
I think all of us are searching for safety and most of us can't find it in the leadership um, in our day to day.
And how does psychological safety affect executive decision making, whether it's good or bad, or whatever effect it has? How does it impact it?
Mm. I think for most healthcare leaders and even clinicians, they have to follow standardized methods, and so oftentimes there's nothing that's loose that they can deviate from, and so psychological safety really for them is challenging because they themselves are personally sort of wired a certain way, but then they have to follow certain administrative or and so it's really hard to, come to terms with it. There is lot of overturn when it
Mhm.
comes to people following those methods, and so a large portion of that, even in the corporate world, how
Right.
many times have you heard people saying this job is soul sucking? And I say, why can't it be soul searching? Why can't you find a little bit of soul within what you're doing rather than thinking that the whole machine or the whole industry um, is negative?
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting point because I have heard that before from employees in a variety of different environments. And what role does leadership play in creating that environment where they don't feel like that? See, I know some of it's personal accountability and we just the way we view things, but leadership I think certainly plays a role. And also, Sadia, I've been in environments where there's prolonged periods of pressure, and teams stop raising concerns. Why do they do that? What is leadership's role in creating an environment where that's not the case?
Yeah. Well, it goes to my central thesis that, performance doesn't fail first, clarity does. So it all boils down to clarity. And if you're not clear with your motives and your actions and the detailed things that you want to actually execute on, how's your team going to do it? So the first thing is to have an honest discussion. Everyone talks about presence. I'm not trying to discount that. It's very important. Everyone talks about authenticity. It's very important. But in a clinical setting or in a healthcare leadership setting, sometimes that goes out the window because you have to follow protocol.
Right.
Protocol is very important. There's a reason why those things were created. But I do think that it's important for others to see themselves in you because what's a leader? A leader is someone you want to emulate, someone you want to follow, someone you want to mirror. And if leadership itself is something that you only do because they ask you to, or you only execute on things that you know you won't get in trouble with, if there's no flexibility in having a real, let's call it what it is, a heart to heart
Mhm.
working environment. And I think it's important to lead with the heart, especially in a fractured world that we live in.
Yeah. I'm with you there. Absolutely. Uh, Savi, you think about leadership and some of the your thesis, some of the ideas that you've and principles that you discuss in a variety of settings. You harken back to your own personal experience in healthcare, and if you're comfortable with it, you don't mind me asking you, You've survived, as you mentioned at the beginning, cancer twice, including a stem cell transplant. How did those experiences reshape your understanding of leadership in the healthcare setting?
Mm. It well, I just have to say my healthcare, I don't think it could have been better. 2 times. It was really great. My oncologist actually showed up one weekend on a Saturday, and I looked at because they have the big clocks in the hospital room, in the quarantine room, and it was like 5:30 in the morning, and I'm like, "Dr. Steinberg?" And I'm like, "Am I dreaming?" He's like, "No, Mr. Clemente, I can't do my rounds later today, so I wanted to come and visit." And then he came on a Sunday, and he did that 2 weekends in a row. It's just it really so I would say, and I think it helps because he actually had lymphoma when he was 17 years old.
Mm,
So that informed his life choices and his professional leanings. So he understands it from that. So I don't expect all clinicians to have a major medical condition to treat people well. But I will say it first starts off with the classic things like compassion and empathy, but also really to really understand what the person is actually saying.
mhm,
To so right in coaching and in other sort of talk therapy, they talk a lot about this idea of actually not only mirroring the person, but also listening to language and seeing what's actually underneath. They call it the glacier, right? So you see the top of the glacier or the bottom
mhm,
glacier. And so really not only listening and trying to understand, but also trying to some degree follow the trajectory of where that patient everyone wants to be, in my situation, cancer free or whatever, not have said surgery or whatever the case may be, but really figure out for themselves what is the person trying to achieve because people want different things. And maybe for them, it's they know that they are terminal. And so for them, they just want comfort in that moment. Maybe that's what they want. Maybe they don't want to go through 6 more rounds of XYZ, and
mhm.
that's a choice they have. So I think the listening aspect is important and also figuring out where they actually reside on that spectrum of healing. Um, Wellness and healing, healthcare, you're in healthcare law, they're pretty siloed. Wellness has all these digs on, healthcare, and healthcare all these digs on wellness. I live in between those, so I can understand. But once your care team is gone, I can only speak from my cancer situation, you're left to your own devices. And that's why adherence is really a big deal. Now it's gotten better because I remember individuals telling me that they would find prescriptions in the wastebasket after a doctor's appointment that
Huh.
individuals didn't want to do anything. And now it's all digitized, which helps a little bit. But how do you get said patient to comply? And how do you allow your leadership to inform them where they feel not only safe, not only comforted, but also feeling like you understand where they want to go in their health journey? Because not everybody wants to go in the same direction.
Yep. Um, yeah, I thank you for sharing that, by the way. So, I mean, my main takeaways from what you just shared are, empathy, connection, listening, um, incorporating those principles into the actual care delivery and the clinical diagnosis and therapeutic treatment. So critical.
Yeah, and, there's a caveat to this, right? You have a full schedule, doctors have, like, 25 patients to see that day. I get it, time is of an essence, and they have to get things done, but it really helps when you ask the person, "What is it that you wanna achieve at the moment?" It's a really powerful question. It's simple, but it's a
Yep.
really powerful one.
Yeah, so again, I don't, I'm not a clinician, obviously, so I'm sure there are clinicians out there saying, "Oh, it's easier said than done," but you're right, that's the balance, right? Which is, well, I have to see, maybe not in the hospital setting, but, certainly actually in the hospital setting because you have to, deal with, whatever the flow is, whatever the
Yep,
inflow is, whether in the emergency departments and or you're a hospitalist and you have to admit patients, but also just in like the primary care setting when you have to see X number of patients. Now, we certainly see more patient-centric sort of concierge type models today that are more focus on patients. There are more of those than there used to be, and I think it's largely 'cause people are attracted to that. But a lot of organizations still have you have to see so many patients over a given amount of time. So, but it's you're right. It's a simple question, right? And so even if you only have 15 minutes to spend with a patient, maybe it's just asking, what do you want to get out of this? And of course, it just depends on the patient's condition, but
Yeah.
it's you still have time to listen. It's just the listening component as well.
Yeah, and also like, I was not afraid to ask my oncologist. He spent an hour and a half with me explaining the huge treatment protocol for a refractory relapse lymphoma, and let me tell you, it was involved. It's like stem cell transplant, stem cell harvesting, 29 days in the hospital, like all these things. And I looked at him, John, and I said, "Dr. Steinberg, do you really think I could do this?" Like, I was serious, and he paused. He actually paused,
Mhm.
and he's like, "Yes, I actually think you can." And I'm like, "Okay, so let's go." I'm not that if he said no, I would say no, but it was reassuring for him to actually take the time and to understand what I was going through. And then, of course, after the conversation, he did a bone marrow aspiration. So I was like, "Oh, if this is how it's starting, this is gonna be an interesting ride." And 16 months of treatment. I did physical therapy. I also even chose to do an immunotherapy, which was, as he called it, an insurance policy because my scans and my blood work was in complete response to treatment, so I didn't really need to. But I'm like, let me just do the whole thing because if it ever came back, then I would have a regret, and I don't like living my life that way. So
Right.
yeah, it's very important.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it. I want to look forward and get your thoughts on, prospectively leadership risk and things like that in the future facing discussion. What leadership risk do you think healthcare organizations are underestimating right now?
Mm. I think that everyone wants to optimize, and I'm gonna take this back to real world. I
Mhm.
learned in my journey of healing that not everything needs to be optimized.
Uh,
You don't have to create something that's fast for it to be effective. And so that's a leadership role in the sense of understanding what the problem is, but also, once again, what is the solution that individuals want, not as a collective, but as segments of said malady or said problem or said situation. I think we all are rushing, and AI is brilliant. Don't get me wrong; it's a tool, and I use it as a tool. But I've been in cohorts with other journalists, and some of them are like, "I feel guilty using AI." Like, anything that you attribute the word guilt to is you have to, as Yoda would say, search your feelings. You have to search your feelings on that. And so that's the number one thing I would say when it comes to leadership, because there was a stat that one of the doctors, I'm currently running a healthcare leadership operating system interview series with CEOs and CMOs. And it was like some staggering $935 billion in healthcare waste at the US. I mean, that's not just in equipment, that's in human individuals making decisions. And that's costing the system. I was floored by it, and that's a lot.
that is a lot. And staying on the decision concept, is that where you think the issue will be over the next decade? Where do you see decision quality becoming more difficult over the next 5, 10, 15 years?
Yeah. There was a recent forum that I did not cover or did not attend where my health system was actually part of the discussion, and they actually did like a trial experiment, and they fed AI 10,000 scans, and it
Huh,
was wrong 6 times out of the 10,000.
huh,
And so they're actually thinking of, first, instead of just eliminating radiologists, which is bad decision, is to first have it checked by AI and then to have it determined by a human, radiologist who's trained and knows what they're doing. And so I'm explaining this example because I think when it comes to decision quality, we all want an answer. Everyone wants an answer, and AI had now trained us to get the answer. But I think what's important is to figure out, does the answer relate to the actual person
mhm,
and their situation? Because it's not about getting the answer. It's about, does the answer actually mean something to the
right.
person, especially in healthcare, because we're dealing with human people. This is not like financial risk is important, but it's not as important as human human lives.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, thank you, Savia. This has been a very interesting, riveting discussions. I have a lot of takeaways from our discussion. I want to end off with lightning round, which I is how I end every episode. But before we get to that, lightning round today is sponsored by Western Associates, as it is every time. It's a company if you're part of an organization and you need corporate branded swag or shirts, I have one I'm wearing right now. If you're listening by audio only, you can't see, but it's got my logo there on the sleeve. They produce high quality branded merchandise and corporate products that people actually want to keep. So definitely look into it if you're looking to elevate your brand through custom merchandise. You can learn more at westernassociates.com. I will also leave a link in the episode description if you're interested in learning more. Okay, Savio, what is just three quick lightning round questions? Of course, in the past, I've asked these questions. They're probably a little deeper than they should be for a lightning round. So I understand if it's not as quick as I'm framing it up to be. Most underrated leadership skill.
Most underrated leadership skill is the ability to discern. Discernment is a huge one, and discernment not based upon like prior situations. Discernment in the moment, where their healthcare leaders are very quick to give an answer on what they think is the right answer, rather than actually figuring out what the right answer is at this moment in time.
Excellent. Best piece of advice you've ever received.
Best piece of advice that I ever received was this idea of truth. So I, like many others, think that if you find an error in truth, you just discard the truth. But no, you discard the error
Mm,
and you leave the truth as is. That sounds a little nebulous, but it's really, you can actually apply that to any situation in life. You just put the error aside, but the truth remains.
I love it. And finally, book every leader should read.
Oh my gosh, a book every leader should read.
And you can say your own, that's fine.
No, no, I no, mine was about cancer survivors, which is important, but
Okay,
that's
but
not.
it's important.
I would I would say I would actually mirror, the book, Autobiography of a Yogi, by Paramahansa Yogananda. Yes, it has spiritual principles in there. Yes, it might be a little, heady and it goes to emotions, but the core elements are really about living, as effectively and truthfully as possible. And I think when you do that, when you make that the cornerstone, rather than always trying to achieve or that actually allows you to be a lot more, accepting and gregarious to other people.
Excellent, amazing, I'll have to check that out. Well, Savio, this has truly been an honor and a pleasure, I appreciate it. Where, if people wanna learn more about you, your TED Talks, your books, where can they find out more information about you?
Sure. So they can find me at my website, saviopclemente.com, SAVIOPCLEMENTE. I have my keynote work. I have a few more spots for keynotes in 2026, my TEDx talk, my book. And also, every Wednesday, I drop a subset newsletter about the head, heart, and gut intelligence. And like I mentioned, my current interview series with healthcare leaders. And if they want to find me on social media, I'm at every platform at the Human Resolve, because at the end of the day, John, what else do we have except to resolve and resolution in our lives?
It's a fair point, it's a fair point. I will also leave a link to Savio's website, and they can subscribe to your newsletter by going to your website?
Absolutely. Yep.
Perfect,
They
oh,
can.
perfect. I will leave that in the episode description as well. Well, Savio, again, true honor, true pleasure. Appreciate you carving out some time for our little podcast here, and I appreciate all your insight.
Thanks, John. This was really informative. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. I want to thank Savio for sharing his insight and his time for this episode. A few takeaways really stood out to me. First, many leadership failures don't begin with poor intentions or lack of effort. They begin with a gradual loss of clarity. Long before performance suffers, decision quality starts to drift. Second, healthcare organizations often focus on surviving a crisis, but recovery requires something different. Leaders must intentionally create the conditions for sustainable performance after the urgency fades. And third, resilience isn't simply about enduring pressure, it's about maintaining maintain perspective, judgment, and alignment when the pressure continues for far longer than expected. For healthcare leaders, compliance professionals, clinicians, and executives, that's an important reminder. The greatest risks often aren't the ones we can immediately see. They're the subtle shifts in communication, decision-making, and organizational culture that accumulate over time. I want to thank Savio again for joining me and sharing his really valuable insights. To our listeners, if you'd like to learn more about Savio's work, you can subscribe to his newsletter or visit his website at saviopclemente.com. That's S-A-V as in Victor, I-O-P as in P as in play, Clemente, C-L-E-M as in Mary, E-N-T-E.com. SavioPClemente.com. At the end of the day, leadership isn't tested when things are easy. It's tested in the moments after disruption when the pressure remains and clarity matters most. This is Health Law Pulse. Thanks for joining us.